I think there were moments where I just sort of thought about the kinds of sequences that I was working on. And I think it's interesting, having been an editor before, it was really about pacing things. So I sort of knew, okay, I had a sense of like, I know that this opening section with the two of them just sort of discovering their feelings for each other, I kind of know how long that's going to take. Like as an editor, I know I have a sense as I'm writing it where you want to have certain turning points in that relationship. But I know that I kind of can have a sense of like that's going to take about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. And then I'm going to need to get to the horror once we've sort of established that. And so it was really about balancing how it all worked in the temporal sense. Like, when are we going to have a horror moment? And then when do we just let the relationship flow a little bit? And that was something that that was a consideration the whole way through the process when I was working on the script. And then when we got into the shoot and then in the edit and all through post, we were constantly balancing that. So, yeah.
Great. When I was watching the film, I've never been to Australia. So as an outsider, I was surprised by how many similarities I saw between rural Australia and the more conservative parts of the United States. I'm
Right.
curious how much the recent political climate of the US has impacted queer communities in Australia and how much of that led to kind of momentum around making the film now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in Australia we've sort of had our own sort of politics around LGBTQ rights. We recently legalized, well, when I say recently, it was about 8 years ago. We legalized same-sex marriage, but it took this whole public debate to get there. And in fact, everyone in Australia got to vote on this one particular issue. They did a special ballot. And even though we won that one, it led to a lot of quite sort of toxic language coming out into public spaces, and in a way that kind of never went away, which was sort of the starting point of this project for me. So yeah, that has been a big one. I don't know that I was consciously thinking about other countries, but I sort of knew that there was something in the air that this was kind of happening all around the world as well. So yeah.
That makes sense. So once you move from having written the script to preparing to direct, I'm curious how you and your collaborators established a visual style that really works for both horror and romance. I'm especially curious about things like the costumes, the locations, and the production design.
Yeah, okay. Well, so this was I'd formed really good connections with a lot of my heads of department from my short films, but unfortunately for a whole bunch of reasons, a lot of them weren't available to work on this project. So it was, the DP, the costume designer, the production designer, the editor, all of them were people I'd worked with for the first time, which was a little scary. But I think I went into it just with a sense of being really open and honest with them. And also when it came to deciding who to work with, just making sure I chose people that I really connected with, people I knew I could just have a conversation with about anything. And so it started, I think the first person I really started working closely with was the DP, Tyson Perkins. And we talked a lot about the sort of visual style and, like you say, merging sort of romance with horror. And he quite quickly, we quite quickly came to the decision to use these anamorphic lenses that sort of not only gave the film a very classic look, they also sort of pointed back to a lot of classic horror movies. Things like Halloween and Alien were shot on those types of lenses. And that was a way to sort of just very, very almost subliminally point to the audience and sort of never let them forget that they were in a horror movie. And we sort of had a lot of little choices like that in the way that Tyson sort of lit the scenes, especially when we were in the sort of romance scenes and that kind of thing. And we also made choices about it wasn't about just balancing horror and romance, it was also about balancing where you get a sense of spirituality. So, for example, we knew that there were these two main locations in the film. One was the church, and one was this abandoned mill where the boys first express their feelings for each other and explore their physicality. And so we sort of decided to kind of invert that and make the abandoned mill feel like the more spiritual place in terms of how it was lit and how the atmosphere was sort of designed with that production designer. And then we kind of went with something a little bit more of an industrial look for the church hall, which is actually a real church hall. It's this sort of grey brick building in the southern suburbs of Melbourne with a red brick cross in the wall. And that was about lighting that space and working with our production designer, Beth Ryan, to put these sort of faded pink lines across the windows to give the sense that this was a little bit more like a factory than the abandoned mill was. So we made little choices like that, which were great. When I started working with Beth Ryan, our production designer, I know that a lot of this was about finding real locations, which wasn't just a budgetary concern. I think that was just to give the feeling a sense of authenticity. Um, and we were quite meticulous about what we wanted this world to be. So we didn't go to one specific town. We went to lots of locations. We sort of did a whole palette of reference images of what we wanted this place to look like. And then we scouted all around Melbourne, all around sort of parts of regional Victoria, to sort of slowly piece together all the different environments that were part of this town that we were creating. And I was constantly drawing maps for the whole team so everybody knew where things were in relation to each other, so that when we did go into shooting and we were traveling sort of 20 miles, 30 miles between different places that were supposed to be around the corner from each other in the story world, people had a sense of that. And then with our costume designer, Zoe Castellano, she really has this incredible sense of tapping into the themes of what each character represents. And she sort of would hook onto certain images. Like she saw that there was a snake and a frog in the opening, and she sort of thought, okay, like who are the characters that might have that sort of reptilian sort of shine to their costumes? And that's where she came up with the idea of the Deliverance healer having this suit jacket that had been maybe ironed wrongly so that it had a bit of a shininess to it. And then that in turn inspired Nicholas Hope, the Deliverance healer actor, to kind of I think he sort of crouches down at one point when when he holds up the lighter, because I think he was kind of inspired by Zoe talking about these frogs. So it's just really fun to work with people who really, really hook into the story and feel inspired and then inspire everyone around them. That's been the really great part of the process.
Awesome. I'd also love to hear about developing the sound design and the score because both of those elements really help set the tone of the film.
Yeah, yeah. I know that when I worked with Emma Bortignon, the sound designer, she really wanted to create something quite natural. Like she's really quite, and this carried through right through to the final hours of the mix, I remember. Like just being driven by a sense of capturing real life and presenting real life rather than sort of blasting bits of sound across everything, even though that can be quite tempting to do in horror. And we certainly had those moments when the horror reaches its crescendo, but we agreed they had to feel very earned. And so when it came to balancing what she was doing with what Jed Cazell, our composer, was doing, that was a real consideration as well. Um, and with Jed, I know that he came on board officially when we were a couple of weeks into the edit. I don't think we'd even finished the first director's pass of the cut. I think he came in when Nick and I had done, I think maybe we had worked on the first half of the film together, and he came in and had a look at a few scenes and agreed to do the film. And then we had a bit of a chat about um, what the sound would be from the score, and he felt the best way to approach it would be to develop a sound that would be the kind of the music that would go with the two boys falling in love, so kind of like a love theme, I guess. And then out of that to develop a more distorted version of that, which would inform the horror, the sounds that you would hear during the horror sequences. And we worked with Jed while we were editing, so we were constantly sending him cuts of scenes and getting things back from him in terms of just sketches of what the cues could be. And then we were passing those back. And sometimes his sketches would inform the cut, and sometimes the cut would inform him, and vice versa. So we were working all through the edit with Jed to come to that, which actually was really helpful because as people may know, we got into Sundance while we were in post on this film, and we actually had to quite move quite quickly through the final mixes and things to deliver on time. So having Jed be kind of quite ahead of the game in that way was actually quite helpful, as well as just a really great process to really explore a way for the music to work, really in sync with what was going on in the picture.
Awesome. Yeah, it works really beautifully. So I want to ask, the film fits very nicely into what I'm going to call the Sundance queer horror canon. Films like, I saw the TV Glow often premiere in the midnight section, like Leviticus did, and find a dedicated audience and build buzz, and then they go on and break into the mainstream. And I'm curious if you think, it's easier to do that with a horror film than a traditional romance drama or comedy that features LGBTQ plus characters, and why that is. Like, why do you think films like this have the capacity of easily breaking into the mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I was talking about before, I think there is a real connection between queer storytelling and horror filmmaking. It sort of goes way, way back. You can trace it back centuries, really, if you go into literature. But some of our earliest horror filmmakers were queer artists and storytellers, and I think there's this incredible connection around those themes of, when otherness and outsider and being an outsider, but also just that idea of when you're on this journey of self-discovery, it can be feel a little destabilizing in the way that I think is kind of the core emotion and feeling state of a lot of horror movies. So I think it kind of works quite well for a lot of people. And I think, there is quite a big audience for queer horror films. And so I think it is something that's becoming more and more acknowledged, I think, which is great.
Yeah. I want to talk about the casting process. The film has been consistently praised for casting actors who not only deliver great performances, but actually look like they're in high school. Um,
Yeah.
that's a rarity in film.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
the lead characters, Name and Ryan, go through some pretty heavy stuff. How did you work with Joe Bird and Stacey Clausen to get such emotionally mature performances?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it started with I worked with Nikki Barrett, who's a real icon of Australian casting. She did, she did things like she cast Mad Max Fury Road and found all those amazing, authentic faces in those, and right through to sort of more contemporary, naturalistic stuff. She's really amazing, and she was quite thorough in terms of just really looking everywhere. I know a lot of people have said, "Oh, Joe Bird was in Talk to Me, and that had the same producers as this film. Did he just get the part straight away?" But he had to audition with like hundreds of other guys and really sort of show what he could do because, like I said, Nikki's so thorough. She wants to make sure she's really looked all over the place. And I'd said to Nikki, yeah, I don't want to cast 25-year-olds and ask the audience to just kind of believe that they're teenagers. I don't think this concept's going to work in terms of that. I think because of the balance of romance and horror, you kind of need to bring a sense of authenticity. Otherwise, there's too many things to just pull you straight out of the story. So we really had to commit to that. Um, so with Joe and Stacey, I mean, Joe submitted this incredible self-tape where I could just see that he had this real, just a real naturalness and a real sense of playing the stakes without over egging anything and without being totally self-conscious about his acting. He just had a real natural awareness of that. And then Stacey also had this incredible capacity to not only convey all of the nuance of a real teenager and what this character was going through, but he also just had he kind of had the acting chops to do this other capacity to the role, which was to be a dual character to play the entity, the monster in the film. And we did these casting workshops where we brought all of our shortlisted actors into to these sessions in Melbourne, and everyone came in for a few hours each and just spent a few hours doing scenes together in different combinations. I'd get different actors to try different characters. Sometimes I'd just spend the time having long conversations with some of the actors to see what they were going to bring to the role. And as soon as we had Stacey and Joe do, I think it was that first scene together where they're looking at the snake, as soon as they did that, it was really clear that there was this quite natural connection between the two of them. Uh, and I felt quite confident from there that we could build the foundation of the film out of that. And then once they were cast, they were cast quite early in the process because I needed to know who they were to fill out the rest of the roles, like the parents and the adults and all of that kind of thing. So they were cast maybe like 5 or 6 months before we started shooting. And because they'd gotten along so well in that casting session, because we'd done a workshop where everyone got to know each other, the two of them had connected out of that first casting workshop. And then when they got the parts, they sort of kept in touch. And even though they lived in different states, they sort of became really good friends. So by the time they turned up on set, well, actually, by the time they turned up to rehearsal, they already had quite a close bond with each other. And then I was able to do, yeah, a lot of different things with them in rehearsal. I I sent them out to just sort of lose each other in the locations so that they could get to know the locations, but then also get to know each other. And so they sort of, I dropped them at different places in these regional areas where we were shooting, and I got them to sort of locate each other and find each other with their phones. And then I sent them into a crowded shopping mall and told them to stay in character while they like shopped for gifts for each other, and so they could feel what it was like to be in public as these two characters that were hiding their feelings for each other. Um, and then individually, I got them to do things like I don't know, just I sort of gave them these monologues from different documentaries about conversion therapy and got them to sort of do these sort of verbatim monologues just as an acting exercise, which was more about them getting comfortable with it. Well, me getting comfortable with them and them getting comfortable with me as a director. It was just kind of an exercise in us all just kind of playing around with what it meant to sort of just be shooting scenes. I just shoot those on my phone out on the street with them, those little monologues, and it was just about them getting comfortable with the themes of the film, but also, yeah, just with sort of engaging with these characters in a slightly more lateral way rather than just sort of rehearsing scenes out of the actual script, which was cool.